is Radio Prague International, coming to you from the Czech capital.
Hi there, this is Radio Prague International with me, Ian Willoughby. In today's programme, new cable cars for Prague's Petřín hill have been unveiled. The garden of a famous villa in the Czech capital is open to the public. And we hear about a Czech project that's helping eels. But first, here's the news with Vít Pohanka.
News.
Foreign Minister Petr Macinka said that Czech companies could help manufacture weapons for the United States using American technology and know-how. Speaking in Washington after talks with representatives of the White House administration, Macinka said the project could help replenish U.S. defense capacity. According to the minister, the Czech government shares similar political and ideological views with the current US administration, giving Prague an advantage in expanding bilateral ties. A European Commission decision to suspend reimbursement of some EU subsidies to Czechia over suspected conflicts of interest involving Prime Minister Andrej Babiš from the ANO party also applies to agricultural funds, a senior EU official told Czech press agency. Agriculture Minister Martin Šebestián for the SPD said that his ministry continued to pay subsidies to the Agrofert holding company. Agrofert said it had received subsidies in line with the law. According to Seznam Zprávy, Agrofert has received nearly 200 million crowns in subsidies since Andrej Babiš became Prime Minister. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that Czech authorities violated journalist Saša Uhlová's right to freedom of expression when police detained her during an environmental protest at the Vršany coal mine in 2020. The court said that Czech judges failed to provide sufficient justification for the detention, which prevented Uhlová from carrying out her journalistic work and documenting police actions during the protest. Uhlová was detained for about 2 hours after refusing police orders to leave the restricted mining area near Most. Industry Minister Karel Havlíček from the ANO party said that Hungary and Italy had joined Czech efforts to protect heavy industry from rising carbon emission costs under the EU ETS system. Speaking in Brussels, Havlíček said the wider coalition now included up to 10 countries, with France and Spain also supporting parts of the Czech position. Prague wants energy-intensive industries such as steel, glass and chemicals to continue receiving free emission allowances. The European Commission is expected to present reforms of the EU emissions trading system in July. Czechia argues the current system risks damaging European industrial competitiveness. High blood pressure affects nearly every second adult man and every third woman in Czechia, according to doctors marking World Hypertension Day this month. Experts warned that the condition often goes undetected despite increasing cardiovascular risks. Cardiologist Alena Hrubeš-Krajčov-Jechová said that women face sharply higher risks after menopause because hormonal changes can increase blood pressure, weight gain and the likelihood of diabetes. Symptoms such as fatigue or insomnia are often mistaken for signs of menopause. Doctors stress the importance of regular blood pressure checks and early treatment. Czechia ranks among the European countries with the earliest tax freedom day, according to the Liberal Institute. This year, the symbolic date falls on the 29th of May, 1 day earlier than last year. The Institute said the date marks the point when people theoretically stop earning money for the state through taxes and public spending and begin earning for themselves. Institute Director Jakub Kuneš said public budget deficits still play a major role, adding 8 extra days of work needed to finance the state. Czechs can expect clear or mostly clear skies, with clouds gradually increasing from the northwest. Daytime highs will range between 21 and 26 degrees Celsius.
Prague's public transport operator has unveiled the new cars for the Petřín funicular, allowing the public to see them for the first time. As reconstruction of the line moves towards completion in the second half of September. Daniela Lazarova reports.
The popular cable car to Petřín has been out of operation since late 2024, and a crowd of curious onlookers gathered to see its upgraded version in action for the first time this week. The sleek black and white cabins with panoramic glass windows drew praise from onlookers.
It looks very nice. What surprised me is that the funicular will not be air-conditioned and will mostly offer standing room only. It is beautiful, but I'm not sure how people will cope with the heat in the summer.
According to Prague Public Transit spokesperson Daniel Šabík, air conditioning would not be effective given the short 3-minute ride time and the frequent door opening. He says each cabin can carry up to 120 passengers, and the cars are not yet operating under full load.
These are verification runs that allow the manufacturer and technicians to complete installation and fine-tune all systems. Once both cars receive operational certification, we can begin test runs, which require a minimum of 240 hours.
The new cars will operate without onboard staff and be controlled remotely from a central control room. The braking system has also been completely redesigned. While the old cars braked via the cable, the new system uses standard rail braking. Prague Deputy Mayor for Transport Jaromír Beránek said the previous cars, dating back to 1985, were badly in need of replacement.
They were something of a hybrid, combining a newer body with older technology. Now the technology has been fully replaced and we have completely new cars that I hope will serve for another 50 years without major intervention.
The new cars were designed by Czech architect and designer Anna Marešová and produced in Switzerland. The cabins are open and airy with large glass panoramic windows. Moreover, the designer added a special feature as a nod to Petrín's reputation as a lovers' meeting place. It is a play of lights that takes place when two cable cars meet along the way. Just before they pass each other, one car gives the other a broad wink. In response, the other blushes and the interior lights of the car turn pink. Each car is divided into 4 compartments and each has a separate entrance so as to ensure more comfortable boarding and alighting of passengers. The lower part of the vehicle is for wheelchair users or passengers with trams. The test runs of the new funicular, whose history dates back to 1891, will continue throughout the summer. It is expected to resume service by the end of September.
And that report was by Daniela Lazarova. The garden of Prague's Rotmeier Villa, one of the finest examples of Czechoslovak interwar architecture, is now open to the public free of charge. Visitors can now explore the garden, famously photographed by Josef Sudek, without having to join a guided tour of the villa itself. Ruth Frankova has been there and has this report.
Těším se, že tady budeme mít až do večera společenský čas. Tak hezké odpoledne.
Dozens of people gathered in the garden of Rotmeier Villa in the Střešovice district on Wednesday to mark its opening to the public. When the villa was built by architect Otto Rotmeier in the late 1920s, it stood almost alone on the edge of the neighborhood. Today it is surrounded by other villas and overlooked on one side by the huge building of Prague's Central Military Hospital. But from inside the garden, none of this is really visible. Over the decades, the space has grown thick with trees, ivy and dense bushes, creating a secluded world of winding paths and hidden corners. Scattered among the greenery are objects made of wood, stone and glass, including works by renowned Czech glass artists René and Libuše Roubíček, adding to the garden's quiet, slightly mystical atmosphere. Eliška Zlatohlávková from the Prague City Museum, which manages the site, says the idea was to make the space accessible even to people who may not want to tour the villa itself.
We think that the garden is magnificent, it's beautiful, and we want to share the atmosphere with the visitors, with the neighbors, with the visitors from abroad, and not to limit it only to the people who want to enter inside. And also you would like to pay some homage to the Rottmeier family. The garden was open to their friends and they had several vivid meetings during the decades when they lived here. So that's both this to share this beautiful garden, just to share the space.
The two-story family home, now included in the prestigious Iconic Houses network, was built for Rottmeier's wife Božena, a well-known fashion designer, and their son Jan. Its design was inspired both by Mediterranean architecture and by the work of the Slovenian architect Jože Plečnik, who oversaw the reconstruction of Prague Castle after the establishment of Czechoslovakia in 1918. Plečnik had been Rottmeier's teacher, and the two later became close friends and collaborators. As Zlatohlávková points out, the villa belongs to an extraordinary generation of modern homes built in Czechoslovakia around the same time.
What is interesting, the villa was built in the same years as the Villa Miller of Adolf Loos, which is about 15 minutes by walk, and in the same time, for example, the Villa Tugendhat in Brno was built. And all three houses share the unique approach for living, and the inner appearance of the house is very purist. There is only the thing they need for a normal life. So there is a kitchen, both parents have their own bedrooms, and there is also the room for the son, and then a small, we can say, winter garden that will lead us to the roof terrace, and then one room in the cellar that served for these gatherings of the friends.
By today's standards, the villa itself feels relatively modest. During the warmer months, however, the garden effectively became an extension of the living space where the family spent much of their time from spring until autumn. Plečnik's influence is evident not only in the villa itself but also throughout the garden. One example is the emphasis both architects placed on wood and natural materials, says Zlatohlávková.
As you can see in the garden, there is a lot of trees and also some artifacts of old trunks of the trees, and the interior of the villa is made of wood. And we can see also the close connection to one Plečnik's villa, Villa Stadion, in the capital of Slovenia, in Ljubljana. And Otto Rottmeier used the composition, the plan of the villa, but Plečnik's version is covered with some decorative details on the facade. This villa is more in the modernist style. Also the garden, here we can see a lot of traces of Jože Plečnik. The part around the house resembles a lot the garden in the Mediterranean area. There are these white little stones, and there are also wine grapes and so on, and some flowers or some trees. They were sent from Plečnik to Rottmeier to Prague, and both men also shared a vivid correspondence, and they shared their experiences in gardening and planting the trees and so on. So it's very nice to read it.
The atmosphere of the garden was captured over the decades by photographer Josef Sudek, a close friend of the Rottmeier family, as well as by Jan Rottmeier himself. Their photographs show how the garden changed over time while still keeping much of its original atmosphere.
That report was by Ruth Frankova. The decline in eel populations is a long-term problem not only in Czechia but across the entire EU. The main cause is dams, which prevent their free movement. At present, their return to original habitats is mainly supported by transporting them from the sea into freshwater rivers. But it's becoming clear that much more will need to be done in the future. Romana Grajcarova has more.
Even though dams definitely carry some positive aspects like providing flood control, serving as water reservoirs and being a source of renewable energy, they can also be detrimental to the environment. In addition to the destruction of original ecosystems and often even human settlements, which literally become sunk costs, Dams also create a barrier blocking fish migration. In Czech lands alone, there are hundreds of dams, mostly built in the 1950s and 1960s, with some of them being large enough to cover a medium-sized town. These giant water constructions thus become an impassable obstacle for millions of fish that need to migrate in order to survive. One of the most impacted fish species are eels. Normally, they would spawn in the sea and mature in rivers. Nevertheless, if this is not an option, they need to be transported from one place to another by car.
Eels spawn in the Sargasso Sea, and then, as monte, they travel towards the coast of Europe. A monte is a young eel up to 2 years of age. Before it leaves seawater, it's caught and transported to farms where it's fattened. We loaded it in Germany and brought it here to Czechia.
Explains Petr Votýpka from Klatovského rybářství, a company specializing in fish farming. This year in the Plzeň region, anglers released tens of thousands of juvenile European eels into rivers in order to improve the population of this predatory fish in its natural habitat.
We imported 500 kilograms of eels for stocking the fishing grounds of the West Bohemian Regional Association of the Czech Anglers Union. That works out at roughly 120 eels per kilogram, and they're about 2 to 2.5 years old.
The European eel was classified by the International Union for Conservation of Nature in 2008 on the red list of threatened species as critically endangered. The major cause of the significant decline in its population is generally considered to be the construction of dams and hydroelectric power plants. According to technician Jaromír Lev from the Plzeň 1 local organization, eels are therefore present in Czech waters only thanks to stocking.
Right after being released, they usually hide in the roots to protect themselves from predators. These are mainly otters, perch, pike, zander, or catfish.
However, this is not the only danger awaiting eels.
They will grow until adulthood and then head back to the sea, where they are supposed to spawn. But river connectivity is poor, so many of them end up in hydroelectric power plant turbines.
This year, the West Bohemian Regional Association will release juvenile eels worth a total of 2.5 million crowns. Of this amount, 2 million crowns will be covered by an EU subsidy, since improving eel populations in member states has long been an EU priority. In the Czech context, possible future solutions could also include the construction of functional fish passes and barriers that would prevent adult fish from entering hydroelectric power plant turbines.
And that report was by Romana Grajcarova. Holešovice Tržnice in Prague's Holešovice district has undergone a remarkable transformation, and Vít Pohanka has been there.
Hello and welcome to Prague Off the Beaten Track, the podcast where we explore the lesser-known corners of the Czech capital. Today I'm crossing the Vltava from Karlín to Holešovice via the Štvanická lávka, a sleek, modern food bridge that in 2023, meaning quite recently, became one of Prague's most elegant new pieces of architecture worth visiting and exploring on foot. But I'm not here to admire this food bridge. I am walking to what used to be a large meat processing complex. Tucked away today between busy roads lies a place that feels like a world of its own. Part market, part cultural hub, simply Holešovická tržnice. And as I approach the main entrance from Bubenské nábřeží, I'm greeted by something quite striking. Two monumental sculptures standing on massive stone plinths, almost like silent guardians of the site. Each shows a powerful human figure alongside a bull, strong, calm, and slightly symbolic. These are allegories of trade and slaughter, reminders of what this place once was. The Western statue, by the way, was created by Czech Vosmík, a Czech sculpture, obviously, and the eastern one by Bohuslav Schnirch, both dating back to the opening of the complex in 1895. There's something almost ceremonial about them, as if you're not just entering a market, but crossing a threshold into a carefully designed industrial world of the late 19th century, where even something as practical as a slaughterhouse was given a sense of dignity, order, and, in a way, grandeur. Now, as I indicated, this complex started its existence as a slaughterhouse, but not just any slaughterhouse. When it opened in 1895 as the central slaughterhouse of the royal city of Prague, it was one of the most modern facilities of its kind in Europe, inspired in part by the famous industrial slaughterhouses of Chicago. Much smaller, of course. Designed by the city engineer Josef Srdínko, it was consulted not just with the senior members of the Prague City Council, but also representatives of the meat processing industry that were going to use it, and built with the involvement of architects and what we would today call a construction and developer magnate, a Alois Elhenický. Again, quite an important name, especially in Prague's history. The entire site was planned with remarkable precision. This wasn't just a collection of buildings, it was a carefully organized system where animals arrived by rail, were housed in separate sections, processed and then distributed across the growing city. Everything had its place, everything had its logic. The scale of the operation is still hard to imagine today. Railway tracks, some of them, or rather remnants of some of them, you can still see. So these railway tracks once led directly into the western part of the complex where entire trains of livestock were unloaded. In the central section there were administrative buildings, a stock exchange for meat trading and even a pub for workers. And in the vast eastern section the actual processing took place, complete with underground refrigeration, engine rooms and a water tower that you can still see today as well. At a time when Prague was expanding rapidly, this was a key piece of urban infrastructure, feeding a city that was becoming a modern European capital. And it wasn't just about size, it was about technology. The slaughterhouse had its own boiler house, used steam power, and later adopted electric lighting systems supplied by major industrial companies of the time. By the 1920s, millions of kilograms of meat were passing through here every year, with transactions handled through a dedicated butcher's bank established on site. It was in many ways a symbol of industrial progress, efficient, centralized and designed to meet the demands of a modern city long before the word logistics became fashionable. But even before the end of communism, in the second half of the 20th century, it was becoming clear that this complex had reached its limits. As Prague grew into a city of more than 1 million people, the slaughterhouse found itself increasingly squeezed by its own location, so close to what was becoming an expanding inner city. What had once been an ideal site on the edge of Prague was now surrounded by urban life. Transport, hygiene and capacity all became issues, and the logic that had once made this place so efficient was gradually turning against it. So, over time, meat processing began to move to newer, more spacious facilities on the outskirts of the city. And in 1983, the slaughterhouse here in Holešovice finally ceased operations. What followed was a transformation that in many ways saved the entire complex. Instead of being demolished, the site was repurposed as a market, a tržnice in Czech, giving these historic buildings a new life. It was a pragmatic decision, but also a fortunate one, because it preserved a unique piece of Prague's industrial heritage that might otherwise have disappeared. But there's a certain irony here. The term market economy itself was, for decades, something very foreign to the communist system. So while this place was officially turned into a market in the 1980s, its real transformation into a lively, colorful and genuinely dynamic space for trade only began after the fall of communism in 1989. Suddenly the rules changed. Private businesses appeared, small traders moved in, and the area began to fill with energy that had simply not been possible before. What had once been a tightly controlled industrial complex started to evolve into something far more organic and far more unpredictable. Over time, Holešovická tržnice grew into much more than just a place to buy and sell goods. It became a culinary destination, shaped in large part by the trading community whose stalls introduced Prague to fresh herbs, street food and flavors that were still relatively new to many locals in the 1990s. At the same time, parts of the complex were taken over by artists, theaters and event organizers. Today, you'll find everything from experimental performances and concerts to farmers' markets and food festivals here. A mix that reflects not just the history of this place, but also the changing identity of Prague itself. So now that I'm actually walking around Holešovická tržnice, what strikes me first is the sheer variety of what's going on here. One moment I'm passing a traditional market hall filled with fruit, vegetables, herbs, cheeses, even honey from local beekeepers. And the next, I'm stepping into a completely different world of food trucks, outdoor seating, and people casually having lunch or a beer. It feels a bit like several places layered on top of each other, part farmers market, part street food festival, part everyday Prague. And then there's the food scene more broadly. You can really sense how much this place has changed over time. What used to be a somewhat rough, chaotic market, known for cheap imports, has evolved into genuinely diverse culinary space. There's a strong Asian influence, reflecting the Vietnamese community that helped shape the market in the 1990s, but it blends with Czech staples and international street food. It's informal, accessible, and constantly shifting, exactly the kind of place where people come not just to shop, but to hang out. But it's not just about food, of course. As I keep walking deeper into the complex, I come across cultural spaces, theatre, galleries, performance venues. Old industrial halls have been repurposed into places for contemporary art, live music, and experimental performances. There are workshops, small festivals, and open-air events throughout the year. And suddenly you realize that this is no longer just a market. It's a cultural hub, constantly evolving, still a bit rough around the edges, but very much alive. And perhaps that's exactly what makes it feel so authentic. So, to sum it up, I think that's precisely what makes this place so fascinating. It's very close to the center, but Holešovická tržnice is not polished or perfect. It's layered, maybe even a little chaotic, and constantly changing. You can still see and, in a way, even experience its past in the architecture itself, in the layout, in the shapes of the buildings that once served a completely different purpose. Now, if you'd like to explore it a little bit more before you decide whether you want to come here or not, head to the Prague Off the Beaten Track page on the Radio Prague International website, where, as always, you will find more information, photos, and a map to guide your visit.
And that's all we have time for today on Radio Prague International. From me, Ian Willoughby, thank you very much indeed for listening, and speak to you again very soon.